Okay. Well, welcome to the Band of Brothers podcast. I'm on today with an old friend from 2005.
I think it was
Six.
2006. Yeah.
Yeah. Mitch Hill. Thanks for being on, Mitch.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
It's good to see you again, buddy. It's been a long time. It's been a long time, probably 15 years.
So much has happened, hasn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Well, thanks for coming on and
Sure.
being willing to share your story with other guys in recovery. There might be guys listening that are 30 days, 15 days, 6 years. And so I hope you all are tuned in and listen up because this guy's got a lot of wisdom and a lot of faith. So let's just kind of start at the beginning. Like, how old were you when you first drank or put any kind of mind-altering substance in your body?
Well, I wasn't young. I think that's what kind of makes my story a little bit different. I grew up in a very conservative family. My dad was a veteran of the Korean War, and he was a banker. Talk about conservative people. He was very conservative. He had a scholarship at BYU as a pole vaulter. And he met my mom at BYU. She was student body secretary at BYU. And so that's where it all began. And so, probably the most conservative university on the planet.
Right.
And so the church was, a big part, especially with my mom. And, we had a safe upbringing. I'm one of four. I have had a sister and I have two other brothers. And it was, for me, it was a situation where, I come from a family of alcoholics and, it just goes on and on. But who doesn't, I mean, everybody I know, can look back a few generations and hear the same story. And so
Right.
For me, my upbringing and everything that I did in my life was very controlled. I felt that I needed to check the right boxes, in our church, of which I did. I did everything that I was supposed to do. One of my big resentments, that really affected me, I think, was growing up. I was always very small. I didn't physically mature until later on in my life. And so, growing up, when on those formidable years when you need to, I guess, have an identity, my identity was always just the little kid. My voice hadn't changed. I wasn't growing physically. My friends all were, and I would go to my mom and I'd say, Mom, what's wrong with me? How come everybody's growing up and I'm not? I want to date. I want to play sports. I want to do all of these things. And she just said, well, Mitch, that's life. Well, I heard that answer from her for most of my life.
Yeah.
And I started, really trying to wonder why my life was so much different, or it seemed to be different than normal people. And, but, I pressed on. I did all the things I was supposed to do. I stayed on the right side of everything. I served a mission in the church. I grew about 4 or 5 inches while I was in Brazil. And so, I didn't even start to mature physically until, I'd go down there and everybody was shaving. And I had a razor and I brought some shaving cream with me, but I never had to use it. So, I really didn't start even growing physically until I was, 21, 22 years old.
Wow.
And that hurt. For me, that was a real big gut punch. And I, because there were so many things that I felt I was deprived of growing up because of my size. My friends were all participating in school sports and church ball and dating and all of these things. And I just didn't feel like I had a chance. And I really didn't. But, so I thought a lot about that. And, coming home from my mission, I did what I was supposed to do. I married my girlfriend who waited for me. And I'm still
I didn't
married.
know you went to Brazil as well.
Yeah, Penniger and I both
Yeah,
were in Brazil, and so we
yeah,
had that in common.
yeah,
Uh, so we could get away talking in Portuguese in the ranch, and nobody could understand us.
yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so I had a very strong, I felt, testimony of the church growing up, because that's what I did.
Mhm.
I didn't go out and mess around. I didn't do anything, because I was just the little guy that stayed at home. And so once I got home and once I grew up, started growing physically, and then, I was 48 years old when I went to the ranch,
Mhm.
right? And I was considerably older than everybody else there. And I remember, um, I was, my family intervened on me. I was in a lot of trouble, at that point. There came a point in my life where I felt like life passed me by and I haven't experienced really much of any of it. And it's not that I wanted to be a drug addict or I wanted to go out and, get in trouble, but, I kind of did. I wanted to see what it was like.
Mhm.
And when I could, I did. And you're talking about my first exposure, to drugs. I remember getting my wisdom teeth taken out right, a month or two before I left on my mission. And I'm guessing that they gave me pain meds back then, but I have
Mhm.
no recollection that it did anything for me. So I didn't even know what a buzz was
Yeah.
until later on in life. And I think my first real experience was when I had a sinus infection. I'd been married I had a couple of little kids, and it was miserable. And I went to the doctor and he gave me a prescription for a drug called Furacet. And I think Furacet, is made for uh, uh, migraine headaches or something like that. That's what I read about it. But I just remember, taking that drug. And
Mhm.
maybe, it was a result of having an antiseptic life up until that point. And that Furacet sent me to the moon. It was the best. In
Mhm.
fact, I remember, to this day, I remember having been on it for 6 hours, calling my bishop in the ward and telling him how much I loved him. And, who does that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was, feeling this sense of euphoria that was just beautiful to me. Well, the Furacet ran its course. I healed up and got through it, and I never gave it much of a thought again. And in the process of all of this, I was working hard. I was, doing stuff in my profession that required a lot of time and so forth. And I had a real problem in those days of sleep deprivation. I couldn't
Mhm.
sleep, and one reason that I couldn't sleep was I'm just hardwired. I'm a little bit OCD. If I wake up in the middle of the night and start thinking, then it's over. My sleep
Mhm.
is over. And so I remember, my dad had a knee surgery, and as part of his medication, they gave him tramadol. They gave him Ultram, which is a muscle relaxant, right?
Mhm.
And so in talking with my dad, I just, over a period of time, I just said, I struggle sleeping. I don't know. He says, well, try one of these things, these kind of relax me, and I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And I did. And boy, did it help me sleep. It gave me another little bit of a feeling of well-being, And
Yeah.
so I played around with that for a while, and my dad knew how much I liked that. And unbeknownst to my father, who died 30, 60 days before my mother did, he became sort of my dealer, you know. And he didn't know it, and I didn't know it at the time, but he would say, you know, come on up here and do some yard work for me at our house, and I'll make it worth your time. And he'd give me half a dozen of these tramadol pills. And
So how old are you? How old are you at this point?
I'm probably 45 years old
Okay.
at this point. So like I said, this is all later in life for me. And I started quickly to realize, you know, that I could stay grounded in my faith, if you can believe this, and not break what I felt was breaking the word of wisdom, but I could get it all out of a pill bottle.
Right.
And boy, you talk about justifying, and I did every way I could. So there came a point in time where I got thinking, I wonder what tramadol would be like if I took some Fioricet with it. I remember those great days. And back in those days, I know it's not like this anymore. I could go online and I was buying truckloads of this stuff online. I had to fill out a little sheet from a pharmacist or a doctor, and then I think they would forward it to this was all offshore. I don't think any of it was happening here.
Right.
And
right.
I had prescriptions at one time coming to my office, to my brother's office, to our shipping department. I had it going everywhere. And in those days, you know, they weren't doing the checks and balances that they should have as far as the amount of drugs that were going out. So I could actually buy Fioricet and tramadol online. And
interesting.
That's where it all began for me. And I mixed that, and you know, my cocktail was just that. And it became such an integral part of my life. I was having stresses and so forth at work. I went to my doctor, and he prescribed me some antidepressants and some anxiety meds and so forth. And, you know, how many of us at the ranch didn't bring those with us, you know, because we'd take our meds every night, you know, because we had to.
Right.
And so my wife thought that my erratic behavior, and it was getting worse and worse and worse, was a result of those prescribed medications, the antidepressants and the anxiety meds. I'm not sure really that any of them helped at all. Maybe they did, but
right.
You know, I look objectively now at how things were, and I'm not so sure that that was it. So I continued with my, you know, tramadol and Fioricet, and my homeostasis just got higher and higher and higher and higher, to the point where I think when they finally took me in to the hospital, I was taking 15 or 20 pills a day.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah. And it was, you know, I couldn't survive without them. And I've got a couple stories that I could say I never told anybody about them, but they completely controlled my life. Keep in mind, all of this time I was still going to church. At the time, I don't know, you know, how religious this conversation goes, but I was the Stake Young Men's president during this time. I was, you know, still very grounded in the church, trying to do the things that I was supposed to be doing. I was losing grip of all of it. You know, my body was so dependent on those pills that, you know, I couldn't rationally make good decisions or anything. And it was a very, very, very difficult time. There was one situation where it was a Sunday. It was my mother-in-law's birthday. And I never shared this at the ranch, but it was her birthday. It was a Sunday morning. I made a mental commitment to God that I was going to beat this thing and I was going to quit. I made that commitment the night before, right? So I went a whole night to morning without taking my drugs, you know? And by morning I was so sick that I couldn't function. So I told my wife to take the kids to church, go do the thing, and I'll stay in bed. I'm just, told her I had the flu or something.
Right.
My head was pounding. I was having sweats, fevers, everything. And they went to church and came back, and they were going to go into Bountiful, where my mother-in-law was going to celebrate her birthday. I told them I was still too sick to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so they left me. They left me at home, right? And I'm in bed. I'm reeling in pain. I can't, other than my detox at the ranch, I don't think I've been in this much pain ever. And I remember getting down on my knees and praying with all my heart, God, I need you. I'm alone. I can't do this. I'm trying to, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing. I know it's the right thing. I need your help.
Right.
And I just remember that so vividly. And I got back up in bed and I was sweating and reeling back and forth, and my body was hurting and my head was aching. And if anything, it got worse.
Mm-hmm.
It got worse. There was no solace at all. And at that point, I thought, even God is forsaking me now. I'm in this alone. I cannot do this, and
Yeah.
suicide was always there. It was always there. The pain was so, so bad. And you have to know that by this time I'd been taking so many pills in such great volume that I had no choice. It owned me.
Yeah.
And so I thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to do here? Am I going to take myself out and have my family come back and see me like that? At the time, I thought I should, and I really needed to. So what did I do? I went into my closet, got in one of my suit coat pockets and grabbed a handful of pills and took them.
Mm.
And my headache went away. My fever went away. I got up, I took a shower, got dressed, drove into Bountiful, and I was the best son-in-law in the world. I was the best father. I was the best husband. I was happy. Everything came back to normal for me. And at that point, I realized I'm going to have to figure out a way to live like this until I'm 80 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would live to be 80, but in my mind, I thought there's no way, I can't do it on my own. God certainly isn't going to step in and intervene and help me. I tried that. That didn't work. I can fool my family for as long as I can. Someday the drugs are going to run out.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do? So in the process of all of this, I was doing a little bit of travel for work up in the Northwest. And that's a whole different story. You maybe remember that. I had kind of a second life going on up in Washington. And I'd go up there, and I legitimately had some customers and business that I could do up there. But the thing I really liked about Washington is that, I had family up there who were not, involved in the faith or any of that kind of stuff. But people up in Washington liked me because I was Mitch Hill. They didn't like me because I'm the Stake Young Men's president, or I own a company, or I've got a great family, or I've got a little bit of money. They didn't like me for that. They liked me because I was Mitch Hill, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I found some sort of a solace up there. And so I was going up to the Northwest more and more often. I'd go up there and I'd see concerts. The music venue up there is great in Seattle. And I just felt no pressure when I was up there. There was no browbeating. There was no church looking over my shoulder. There was no, I shouldn't be doing this because people might see me. I could be free, or I thought that's where I could be free.
Now, you were in a social situation there? Were you drinking? And
I was taking my pills.
Okay.
So
the people
I never
up in Washington weren't using or drinking. That wasn't a using scene up there.
It kind of was.
Yeah.
But the only reason I didn't drink, it's not that I didn't have opportunity. I hated it. I hated the taste of it. I just didn't like it.
Right.
And for me, alcohol just didn't work.
Right.
I can only imagine had it worked, you can get alcohol anywhere. I probably really would have got myself into trouble. But no, the environment up there was definitely much more relaxed as far as, what you could do and get away with.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was good for me at the time because I felt like I was under so much pressure back here at home. And so, that went on for, a couple of years. I was going up there fairly frequently, and I went up there legitimately for business. But while I was there, I'd do the music scene. I loved it. I have a couple of guitars and amps up there that are still there to this day.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been back, and talk about a trigger. I think Seattle and I start to get nervous, but for me. But anyway, so on Memorial Day, 2006, that's my sobriety day. My sister, who passed away last year, which has really been difficult for me, but my little sister, while I was away, my family came into my office at work. And like an idiot, because I'm so fastidious about everything I do, I kept this folder of all of the transactions I'd made with all of the pharmacists and these offshore doctors and everything. I had hundreds of receipts and everything, all these drugs. And
It's like the White House tapes, huh? Like Nixon's
kind of
tapes.
was, yeah. It really was like that. It was my own personal little Watergate thing going on. But so when I got home, I remember it was Memorial Day. My sister called me, and I have a half brother from Korea that my dad adopted years and years ago who passed away, and he's buried in the Bountiful Cemetery. And my sister asked me if I could take her to the cemetery, show her where the grave is, because she had some flowers to put on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, this was the first day back from Seattle, right? And she came and picked me up. Everything looked normal. She took me to the Bountiful Park, and I said, wait a minute, we're not cemeteries on the other side of town. She says, well, I need to talk to you about something. And we went to this little pavilion, just the two of us. It was on a holiday, so everyone was at the cemetery. Mm-hmm. And we sat down, and she said, first of all, I want to tell you how much I love you. And that was hard.
Yeah.
That was really hard. And I thought, oh my gosh, you've got cancer.
Yeah.
You're going to tell me you're going to die. And she said, no. She said, I know that you're in a lot of trouble. You're in a lot of pain. And she pulled out this folder that I had in my desk with all of these transactions, drug transactions in it. And she said, you've struggled for a long, long, long time, and you're at a crossroads right now. And you have to make some decisions. She said, you're on the brink of losing your family. There's a good possibility you'll lose your job. I have partners in this business, and I wasn't performing to where I should have been.
So were you hiding this from your wife the whole time, or was it?
Yes, she had no idea.
So it wasn't like these are my prescribed meds and I'm taking it,
No.
honey. Okay.
No, the
So it's all
stuff,
covert.
the others, the real drugs that I was using was all covert. They were going to various places, and I'd collect them and, and have all of these drugs. She thought I was struggling with my anxiety meds and my antidepressants.
Gotcha.
She genuinely thought that. And I thought, great, this is great. Because, now she kind of thinks that it's something different than what it really is. So I felt really good about that.
Right.
My relationship with my kids who were growing up, were poor. Everything was poor. Everything was ridiculous. I look back on my life now and how I was behaving. And it's interesting. Everybody can tell that something's wrong except for you, right?
Right.
And so, who's the buffoon here? But so she told me, she says, listen, we've got to make some decisions. And H, when that happened to me, I thought to myself, this is the scariest day of my life.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm going to lose everything, everything. I just bought a Harley Davidson. I had a scheduled trip to go to Wendover with my guys, the week that I was intervened on. And that's a different story. I'll tell you about that. But anyway, she said, while you've been away, we've done some research. We've talked to some people at a place called Ren'ais'sance Ranch. It's a church-based facility. And keep in mind, H, I had a very strong testimony of my faith.
Mhm.
And it was years and years and years of study of the Book of Mormon. And I didn't fully understand all of the government of the church, but I didn't need to.
Mhm.
Because to me, if the Book of Mormon was true, then Joseph Smith saw what he said he saw.
Mhm.
If the Book of Mormon is true, then the insanity with the blacks and polygamy and everything else will wash out, and did wash out. And there's rhyme and reason behind it, even though I have no idea what that is. I don't need to know that. But what
Right.
I do know is that Book of Mormon for me was true. My wife said I spent the first half of my life trying to convince people of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. And I spent the second half of my life trying to convince people that it was a fraud, right?
Mhm.
And I couldn't do that. I just couldn't do it. So
Yeah.
throughout all of this, my testimony of the church was real. I was angry. I was angry at God. It's funny how I was so angry at God, but I had such a love for Christ.
Yeah.
And for me, I thought this plan is flawed. There's so much unhappiness. There's no, where's the fairness in all of it? My
Yeah.
whole life was trying to balance out, something that can't be balanced out without an atonement to fix it
Yeah.
all. And
Yeah.
for
Why do
me,
bad things happen to good people, right?
yes, yes. And
Because of agency.
because of that agency thing, dang it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I still had that to hang on to. But when my sister told me, she said there were a number of things going on. My brother at the time was a policeman. He was circling in his police car, thinking I might bolt, I might run. The
Had
problem was I
the
was,
taser ready for you.
oh, he was already, yeah, he was
Yeah.
ready to cuff me up. The problem was, is I was so weak at the time that I couldn't do anything. So she said, listen, here's the deal. We've talked with your partners. Um, Mom and dad don't know anything about this. We're going to take you up to Lakeview Hospital. They have a wing up there where you're kept anonymous. They didn't even have my name down. There was only a few people that were allowed to come in. And she said, your Debbie is up there at the hospital as we speak with a suitcase. And my sister asked me, she said, do you have any drugs on you right now? Well, of course I had drugs on me right now.
Mhm.
I emptied my pockets and I gave all of those pills to her. I think it even impressed her how much I was carrying at the time. But when you're taking 20 pills a day, you've got to have your stash. So I
Right.
remember she put me in her car and I thought to myself, if you can believe this, at last, the insanity might go away. It's not how
Mhm.
I would have chosen it. It's not what I wanted to have happen. I had no idea what I was in store for. I was afraid. I had no idea. I got up to the hospital and there was my wife, um, who now knew a little bit more about my situation than she did a week earlier.
Yeah.
She didn't believe it. She almost fought it. You're not taking him to a a rehab or anything. He's fine. He's just got some bad antidepressants.
Yeah.
Well, she learned a lot while they trespassed my office, right? So anyway, so I remember going up to the hospital. I remember them waiting. There was a staff waiting there. Believe it or not, Scott Erickson was there waiting.
Yeah.
And to this day, I have a very good relationship. He's my personal physician today.
Awesome.
I love the man, but they took blood. And I remember them putting me in a room all by myself. My wife said I sat there and stared at the wall with my hands like this for 3 days. 3 days. I remember a little Asian nurse coming in every so often, giving me a little cup of Librium. I guess that's to prolong the inevitable, which was the worst. But anyway, I thought that those 3 or 4 days at Lakeview was my program. I thought I was done. At the end of 4 days, I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to get on my Harley and go with the boys to Wendover, and I'm done. I passed the test, right? 4 days, no drugs. They were giving me a drug to keep me from, detoxing, but and then in walks Steve Brown, right? And I said, Steve, who are you? What are you doing? And he told me that, he's on staff at Ren'ais'sance Ranch. And I said, well, what the hell is Ren'ais'sance Ranch? I didn't even know about that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, we're going to go and we've got a place for you where you can, learn a few things and get better. And I said, I'm better. I'm better now. Look at me. I'm better. And I said, I've got this big trip that, I just bought my Harley like about 4 months earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I've got if I have to go, look, here's what I'll do. Let me go with my boys over the weekend up to Wendover and do that trip. And then when I come back, we'll talk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was going to have none of that. He said, Mitch, your journey is just beginning. And so he took me, and I remember it was kind of a quiet drive. I was in his car. We drove up to Park City. I said goodbye to my wife. I didn't know if I'd ever see her again. I thought she might leave me before I got done. And that started, in my opinion, the best part of my life.
Yeah.
And it was just so surreal to be able to finally see what had happened and what was going on. And that first day walking downstairs to that, they were having group and Chris was conducting it. And I looked around and saw all of these drug addicts and these, scarred up arms and, guys that looked like, they'd kill me. These were career criminals as far as I was concerned. I never knew how much I would end up loving all of them. But I remember Steve taking me downstairs and kind of handing me off to the group.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking and I'm thinking, what am I doing? What is this? And Chris said, we'd like to introduce, our newest brother, Mitch Hill. Mitch, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I looked around and I said, guys, I really don't belong here. Well, first of all, they all went around. My name is so-and-so. I'm a cocaine addict. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a heroin addict, all of this stuff. And by the time they all went around and I said, look, I wish you all the best, but, I don't belong. I take a few pills and that's it. And then I noticed all of them smiling. I thought, this isn't funny. I don't belong here. You do, I don't. And then Chris asked me some questions and she says, well, what pills were you taking, Mitch? And I told him, and she says, well, how much were you take, or have you been taking? And I said, well, you know, I mean, a few. And when I said 20 or 25 a day or whatever it was, you know, every everybody kind of started to laugh. And you know something? Maybe it was because of my age, but from that moment on, they referred to me as the Godfather. Then on, I was the Godfather. And they're going, who can live on 25 pills every day, 20 pills every day? You know, who does that? I thought, well, my problem came out of a bottle. I wasn't shooting anything in my arms, or I wasn't snorting anything, you know. But it didn't take me long to really understand that my addiction was every bit as insidious and dangerous as anybody else in that room, maybe more so.
Yeah.
And I remember Scott Erickson telling me later, you know, because he'd come up every week, right, and check on us. And he said, you know, Mitch, when we took your blood and got your blood and looked it over, he said, you were a matter of weeks away from dying. You know, your toxicity level was so high. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I was going to figure out how I was going to live to be 80 years old on my drugs, you know. So anyway, that's how it all began for me. It happened later in life. I always felt that if 2 pills is good for you when you're sick, then 22 is going to be better.
Absolutely.
And that's just kind of how I thought forever. And so my experience at the ranch, you know, scratched a number of itches for me. Was it easy? No, it was terribly difficult for me. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but a week or so after I got there, I needed to sign some papers for my work, for the bank or something. And so my wife came up with these papers, and I guess you guys gave her permission to come up so I could sign these papers. And they put the paper in front of me, and I was shaking so hard that they had to hold my arm down and almost sign my name for me, because I didn't have any control over, you know, my body at that time. I was detoxing, and it was so terrible that, you know, my wife at that point just realized, you know, how sick I really was. And maybe she needed to see that.
Yeah.
But that experience at the ranch, you know, and we had a lot of things happen in the ranch. You remember those days?
I
You
do.
know, we lost some of our brothers, and some weren't quite ready to be there at that time, I guess, you know, and
Yeah,
I
we
thought
had a moment we call the
Black Saturday.
Black Saturday, and we had found out that guys were slipping out and going to Little Red Barn and drinking and chewing and a bunch of different stuff, and
Yeah.
we had to make a decision, and
You made the right decision.
yeah, it was not easy. It was we were a young business, and our company refunds money when people don't stay, versus a lot of other centers. So as a young business owner, we were looking at paying back a pretty good nut. And along with, the more important thing was, some of these guys might go out and die, which, you know, that's them. And it was Mitch and Dave and Clay that we kept out of 12. We kicked 9 guys out in one day.
Yeah.
And probably should have kicked Dave out, but we didn't.
Well, Dave is.
I'm grateful
Dave and
we did.
We had Dave and I had a real come to Jesus after that happened, and
Yeah.
and
The funny thing is whatever now, 18 years later, all 3 of you are still sober.
Yeah.
And so, and that's not, hasn't anything to do with the ranch. It just shows that you guys were in, and nothing against the guys. In fact, some of the guys that were kicked out are sober now and come back, and a few of them have thanked us. And
on the other hand,
some of the guys you went through too, are, you know, have passed on. You know, we got Mike and Jeremy, and I don't know if you were in with Mike much, maybe not, but Mike
Rob,
Elliott.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
I
we
remember Rob,
know how
Blue.
terminal this disease is.
Yeah, no, in fact, I had to show this to you. I'm in my office right now. Let me just show this to you. Can you see me? I can't.
I'm sort of, sometimes it's sort of like it's looking down on you, but I can see you good now.
Okay, let me show you this, H.
Hopefully I'm a lot less. Oh yeah.
When I graduated, if that's a word, when I moved on, my wife bought this and she took it to the ranch. You can't see it, but around here, even your name is signed on here.
Yeah, I see
She
it.
had everybody sign this.
Yeah.
And there you are, H.R. Brown and Steve and Chris, and some of these guys aren't around anymore.
Yeah.
Some of the names on here aren't here anymore. And so I keep this in my office for those who are watching. This was a picture that we had in the ranch, and we'd see it every day.
Yeah.
And for her to get that for me, I'm reminded every single day, of survivors and some that aren't survivors,
Yeah, it's
So
called the painting is called The Journey's End, and it's Derek Hegstead. And for those of you who don't have video, it's basically the Savior giving a hug to a man, and I've always loved that. I think some of us grew up in whatever religion we did, thinking God was mean and vengeful and waiting for us to do something wrong. And I know now he's just sits around waiting for us to do something right. And I believe once we pass through and we get to meet him, that it's just going to be a big hug and, hey, I got you,
yeah,
which he always has. We don't always want to believe that because many of us don't think we're worth it.
I think for so long, at least I did, I believed the lie.
Yeah.
And that, took its toll. It does take its toll until you have to kind of reinvent. At least I had to when I came home. When I finally got home, I had to reinvent my life a little bit. I had to play by a whole different set of rules.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I had the support where I could do that. I'd come home and I'd go golfing, months and months and months later, and open my golf bag to get some balls out, and there was a bottle of pills.
Yeah.
Or I'd come to work and I'd look in the back of my drawers and there'd be some pills. So I had to make decisions before I even saw those pills as to what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And you guys taught me. You said, you're going to come across this. When you go home, this is when the work really begins. Because here we're in kind of that bubble, that environment of support, and this is a cruel world, and those pills are going to be there forever, and they always have. I cannot tell you how many times I have sprinted to our bathroom up here in my office and dumped stuff down the toilet and flushed before I even had a chance to think.
Yeah. That's smart.
And that's
Yeah, I
all.
think, Steve always said treatment's really discovery. And when you get out, that's really when recovery happens. That's kind of when the rubber meets the road. And
Right.
so what post-residential, what did you do? You went to aftercare? I think you did.
I did.
Yeah.
I was very engaged in aftercare. I went to all of my, AA meetings, and, we'd come back and I'd give you the little slip that said I was there, and, all of those kinds of things. I stayed very involved that way. And one thing that I wanted to do once, and for me, that was critical. I know you guys you really did want me to check into sober living.
Mm-hmm.
And I had too many things professionally going on in my life at the time. I don't want to say that I learned my lesson, because every day you learn a lesson,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I had enough recovery support under my belt. At the time I was working with Tim Border. Do you remember Tim?
Oh yeah.
I loved Tim Border, and his story and my story were quite similar to me. And so we would go to meetings together and some of that stuff. So, I I was able to learn enough to kind of keep me safe. I reached out a lot, you know. I'd come back periodically to the ranch. You guys moved after I left. Um, and so, I remember I got one of my company vans and we loaded it up on the move and we moved a bunch of stuff to the place out in Bluffdale. Is that where it was?
Yep. Yep.
So, things were a little bit different. And then, over the years, things have changed. But I just, and I've had an opportunity to speak to, youth groups and so forth about my journey. I'm not afraid to share. I'm not afraid. I don't care who hears it, because the reality of it is that this can happen to anybody. I remember being in the ranch and some of the guys in the class would look at me and say, "You're such an idiot. What is with you? You make a little bit of money, you've got a company, you've got a family, you got a great job. What is with you?" And I said, all those things you tell me are true. So tell me why all I want to do is kill myself. All I want is peace. That's really all I wanted was peace. And, I gradually learned, that peace is something that's out there and it's available and it's attainable. I'm not saying every day is a peaceful, wonderful day. I still have struggles to this day, every
So
now
what
and
do
again.
you do daily to stay sober? What are some of the behaviors or activities or things that you do that you think, hey, this is a big part of my recovery or just my mortality, like just finding some peace and joy in life? What do you do? What can you share with the guys?
Well, I'll tell you what has really helped me is sharing my story, freely. I'm not ashamed of it. I don't, my kids, we talk about it. My wife and family say they call this period of time in my life when dad went to boys camp, So when we talk about boys camp, that's the ranch, right? And and so it's always out there, I don't try to pretend it never happened. Even when I play with the band, you know, sometimes we play in venues, outdoor venues, big parties and so forth, where alcohol is served.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in the band, everybody wants to be your friend, right? Everyone wants to be with the band.
Right.
So, we're offered drinks and stuff like that, and right then and there, I have an opportunity to talk with them. I said, let me talk to you about a 12-step program that keeps me to this day free and clear of this. And 100% of the time, 100% of the time, people respect, those of us that, went down that road and that have come back. Never has, I always thought, well, people are going to look down at me and they're going to think, well, what a weak-minded drug addict or whatever. But no, they want to hear the story. And 100% of the time, I have my little brother that's in big trouble, or my mom and dad are struggling with this, or what can we do? You know the story. It happens all the time.
And that negative stuff that we hear is usually our own voice telling us. It's not other people. It's us thinking that's what they're thinking and mind reading and doing all that stuff. And yeah, there's so many opportunities to share recovery in some of the strangest places. And I think the ability to be open about that, I appreciate you being open about that. And for a guy that started using late in life and for a guy that was very religious for most of his life, how has your spirituality changed in recovery versus before recovery?
Well,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Okay.
I I I love my Heavenly Father now. I didn't, but I do now. Um, and this recovery business is impossible without the hope of, a savior, just like the pitcher, who's got this.
Yeah.
I've got this, And I didn't think that anybody had this back in the day, but now I know they do. And so if they have it for me, then they have it for the guy down the street who's a gutter drunk right now.
Mm-hmm.
Or they have it for so many people of our faith that, are living, I don't want to, I've talked with enough people to know that, we should be the happiest people on earth because we have the most to be happy about. And that being said, why are so many of us miserable? Why do we think that the atonement applies to everyone else but me? Or I'm not good enough? Or, I remember around the corner from where I lived, there was a recovery outfit there called Cold Creek Wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still there. Now it's Diamond. They've had a number of recovery programs there. But I would take, when I wanted to give back, I would go there every Sunday and I'd take whoever wanted to go to church with me to church.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I'd have a chance to sit and talk with them. And they wanted to hear my story and I wanted to hear theirs.
Yeah.
And I used to say, look at you, you got snot running down your nose, you got a blanket around you, you're freezing cold, and it's 105 degrees outside right now.
Yeah.
I said, I need to see you guys like this every bit as much as you need to see me.
Yeah.
Because I need to be reminded of how it was, and you need to be reminded of how it will be or how it can be. And I'm convinced that nobody can be effective in recovery who hasn't walked that walk, who hasn't done it, and maybe that's why, Ren'ais'sance was so perfect for me, because there was no bullshitting anybody. The minute I started to, take a tangent out there, Chris or you or Steve or somebody would reel me in right then and say, okay, you're not pulling anything over on us, So I quickly realized that I had to be real and genuine, and I had to say what it really was, to the people that understood what it was that I was feeling. And that, to me, was what made the program so effective. So what I'm doing today, I try to share, I try to keep it going. I'm still involved in the church, do I still feel that, Chris told me that what has destroyed my life was cultural Mormonism. She told me that early on. She said, you know too much about the church. Your testimony is too strong, and you're letting, the machine consume you. And she was right.
Yeah.
We're all at different levels of, progression out there in the church. And some people do it right, and some people could do it a little bit better. But the minute we start judging the church by the people in it, you're in trouble. You can't do that,
Yeah. Well, I think you said something too, that you love your Heavenly Father now. And I think even a more important thing for us to know, because of the shame that we all have, many of us have, most of us, is that He loves us.
Yes.
No matter what we do, no matter what we've done, and it's hard for a finite mortal mind to comprehend infinite love, because I love conditionally. I love my kids sometimes conditionally. I love people. It might not be conscious, but there's a whiff of them in there. and so it's like, well, how can somebody really love me through all that?
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that a guy told me early on in my recovery was, quit trying to prove your love to him, just accept his love for you, because it's just there. And many of us don't believe that. And I wake up some mornings questioning that. Luckily, doing my step work gets me back right sized to that. But hey, man, I know you've got to get to a family thing. I
Well,
appreciate you being on. There was my wife used to call Park City Renaissance was the Camelot, and it's only people that remember JFK know what that means.
I
So
know exactly what she's referring to,
yeah,
and how
but
lucky people.
I realized that it wasn't the place; it was the people that were in the place, and you were a big part of that, and the spirit that the three of you kept, the foundation that you guys maintained while 9 guys left and 9 new guys came in, and the example that you led for those men, staff couldn't have done that. It had to be clients, and it had to be brothers, and dude, for the work you've done with people over the years and all the things. And I just, I haven't talked to you in a while, but it seems like I just saw you yesterday. I don't know why, but you've always been a very familiar spirit to me.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving back the way you give back, and I sure love you.
Well, thanks for saving my life.
We
Thank
know
you.
that's not true.
Well, that's a lie that I will believe. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much, H.
You got,
Love you,
buddy.
brother.
Love you too, Mitch. Take care.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.